The blizzard hit faster than the forecast promised, swallowing the mountain road before we could turn back. By the time the car slid to a stop, the snow was already climbing past the tires. There were 4 of us trapped that night: me, Daniel, his sister Emma, and our friend Lucas. The only shelter nearby was an old roadside house, half buried and dark. The house looked abandoned, but the front door wasn't locked. A cold draft rushed past us as if the place had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and something older, like metal and rot. Emma joked nervously, but her voice echoed too much for a house that small. We split up to check the rooms, calling out to see if anyone was home. No one answered, yet the feeling of being listened to never faded. Daniel found a fireplace and managed to start a weak fire. The light revealed handprints on the walls, smeared and layered like they'd been made over years. Lucas said they were probably old stains, but he avoided touching them. His hands shook when he sat down. The storm grew louder, pounding the walls with heavy thuds. The windows rattled like someone tapping from outside. Emma looked through the front window and went silent. She pointed at the snow. Footprints surrounded the house. They weren't leading away, only circling the walls again and again. Each loop looked deeper, as if whoever made them had been pacing for hours. Lucas laughed once, too loudly, and said maybe it was an animal. No one laughed with him. When we checked the back door, it was blocked by snow from the outside. The handle wouldn't budge. Daniel suggested we stay together in the living room. None of us argued. The fire dimmed suddenly, even though no wind had entered. Shadows stretched across the ceiling, twisting unnaturally. That's when we heard the knock. It was slow and deliberate, coming from the front door. 3 knocks, each spaced perfectly apart. I stood up without thinking, my legs numb. Emma grabbed my arm and shook her head. The knocking came again, harder this time. Snow fell from the ceiling beams with each hit. Daniel called out, asking who was there. The voice that answered didn't belong to anyone outside. It sounded like Emma. She froze beside us, her face drained of color. The voice outside repeated her name, softly, patiently. Lucas backed toward the hallway, whispering that this wasn't possible. The hallway light flickered on by itself. Footsteps echoed from the 2nd floor. We all stared upward as the ceiling creaked under slow movement. The sound was heavy, like boots dragging through snow. Emma started crying quietly, saying she never went upstairs. None of us had. The front door handle began to turn inch by inch. Frost crawled along the frame, spreading inward. The voice outside changed, cycling through our names. Each one sounded wrong, stretched, like it was being learned. Daniel screamed for us to move, and we ran for the back of the house. The hallway felt longer than before, bending slightly as we moved. The staircase was suddenly clear, leading upward into darkness. The footsteps stopped as soon as we reached it. From behind us, the front door burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sound of breathing that didn't match any of ours. The fire went out completely. We climbed the stairs without speaking, knowing whatever followed didn't need light to find us. The last thing I heard was the door closing gently behind us, and someone locking it from the inside. The snow started falling just before midnight, thick and heavy, swallowing the road faster than the plows could clear it. By the time our car stalled, the world beyond the headlights no longer existed. There were 4 of us stranded that night: me, my cousin Ethan, our friend Laura, and Ben, who was driving. None of us panicked at first because the engine had stalled before and usually came back. Ben tried the ignition again and again until the sound of the starter faded into nothing. That was when the cold truly set in, creeping through the doors and into our bones. Our phones showed no signal, just empty bars and frozen screens. The road behind us had already disappeared under fresh snow. That was when Laura pointed ahead and said she saw a light. At first, I thought it was a reflection in the snow, but then it flickered again. The house stood alone beyond the trees, its porch light swaying slightly in the wind. There was no visible driveway, no fence, and no tracks leading to it. We didn't talk about how strange that was. We were cold, scared, and running out of options. As we approached the house, the snow seemed quieter around it. Even the wind felt muted, like the storm respected the place. The door opened before we knocked. A tall man stood there smiling, as if he had been waiting. He introduced himself as Arthur, and welcomed us inside without asking questions. His voice was calm, but his eyes never blinked. The warmth hit us instantly, almost painfully. The smell inside was wood smoke mixed with something old and damp. The walls were lined with framed family photos. Every face in every picture had been scratched out. Arthur noticed me staring and said they didn't like being remembered. I didn't ask who they were. He told us the storm wouldn't pass until morning. He said leaving before then would be dangerous. As we sat near the fireplace, Laura whispered that she felt watched. I noticed the hallway behind us was darker than it should have been. Ethan asked Arthur how long he had lived there. Arthur hesitated, then said, "Long enough to know better." That was when the first knock came from the back of the house. Arthur stiffened instantly. He told us not to answer the door no matter what we heard. He said the storm brings things that learn your voice. Another knock followed, harder this time. Then a voice spoke, calling Ben by name. Ben stood up immediately. None of us had told Arthur our names. The voice sounded normal, calm, almost relieved. It said it was freezing and needed help. Arthur grabbed a shotgun from behind the fireplace. His hands were shaking. He told us if it sounds like someone we know, it isn't them anymore. He said the storm borrows faces. The knocking turned into scratching. Long, slow sounds dragged across the door, testing it. Laura started crying when the voice outside repeated something only she knew. Her childhood nickname echoed through the room. The door bowed inward slightly as if something heavy leaned against it. Snow blew through the cracks, but nothing came inside. Then everything stopped. The silence pressed against our ears. Arthur said the storm was deciding. He said it never takes everyone at once. Ben suddenly screamed. We turned just in time to see him being pulled backward down the hallway. There was no struggle sound, no footsteps, just the soft scrape of shoes on wood. Then Ben was gone. Arthur slammed the hallway door shut. He said we couldn't follow, or there would be nothing left of us. We stayed awake the rest of the night, huddled together as the house creaked. Shadows moved where no light reached. Sometimes we heard Ben's voice calling for help from inside the walls. Arthur told us not to answer. Just before dawn, the fire went out. The cold returned instantly. Arthur stood and said it was time. He opened the front door without looking back. The snow was gone. The house was gone too. We were standing in the middle of an empty field with no trees, no road, and no footprints except our own. Ben was never found. The police said exposure and shock caused hallucinations. They said storms can do strange things to people. But every winter when snow starts falling at night, I hear knocking, and the voice always knows my name. The snowstorm arrived without warning, thick and relentless, turning the highway into a white blur within minutes. By the time the radio crackled and went silent, we knew we weren't getting out anytime soon. There were 5 of us in the roadside diner when the storm trapped us inside. Me, the owner named Carol, a trucker called James, a young couple named Ryan and Elise, and an elderly woman who never gave her name. The diner was supposed to close at midnight, but no one could leave. The windows were already sealed by drifting snow, and the door wouldn't open more than a few inches. Carol tried calling for help, but the landline only hissed. James joked that we'd be telling the story for years if we survived. The old woman sat in the corner booth, hands folded, watching the door. She hadn't ordered anything, yet a cup of coffee steamed in front of her. I noticed the footprints first. They led from the bathroom door to her booth and stopped under the table. Ryan laughed and said someone must have tracked snow inside earlier, but no one's boots were wet. Around 1 a.m., the lights flickered and dimmed. The old woman smiled like she had been waiting for that moment. She said storms like this bring travelers who miss their turn. Carol asked what she meant, but the woman didn't answer. A knock echoed through the diner. Not loud, just firm and patient. James stood and moved toward the door. The old woman spoke sharply and told him not to open it. The knocking came again, followed by a voice asking for help. It sounded young, scared, and freezing. Elise covered her mouth when the voice said her name. None of us had told the old woman our names. Carol grabbed a kitchen knife and whispered that no one was outside when she last checked. The windows were too snow-covered to see anything now. The old woman finally stood up. She said some storms don't pass until they're fed. Another knock came, harder this time. Snow sifted through the cracks in the door. The voice outside changed. It sounded older, calmer, almost annoyed. James stepped back from the door when the handle twisted on its own. The lock rattled, testing its strength. The old woman walked toward the door and pressed her hand against it. Frost spread from her palm like veins. She told us the road stayed buried because something was still crossing it. She said it learned patience long ago. Suddenly, the bathroom door slammed open. Wet footprints appeared on the tile, forming slowly as if pressed by invisible feet. Ryan backed into a table, knocking over chairs. Elise screamed when the footprints turned toward them. The old woman sighed and said someone always leaves when the storm gets hungry. Her eyes rested on James. Before anyone could react, the door burst open. Snow poured inside, but nothing else crossed the threshold. James screamed as something dragged him backward into the white. The door slammed shut on its own. Silence followed. No wind, no knocking, no voices. The old woman sat back down. Her coffee was gone. By morning, the storm cleared suddenly. Rescue teams arrived hours later. They found the diner empty except for 4 people in shock. No sign of James was ever found. The road reopened by noon. The diner closed permanently that same day. Years later, when I drive through that stretch of highway in winter, I see a diner that isn't there. And sometimes I see footprints leading to a door that doesn't exist.